Hey everyone. I wanted to make a video talking about this point that I've really been looking at for some time now. I mean, obviously, if you watch any of my videos that I've posted since the past 10 years plus, I guess 12 years now, I mean, it's not a new topic for me to talk about per se, but I'm really looking at how to formulate this point so people can understand and see what I see, which is this false dichotomy that people create about capitalism versus communism. And that doesn't mean that I'm suggesting that we promote both. It's just that we tend to think of things in terms of boxes, and we're not able to look at what's best within something and take that and then create something uh, that's actually best based on that. We instead just take what's given to us, and then and since you're given two choices, you have to choose one. That's an illusion of choice. That's not real choice, because you're not looking at what's possible to create if you were to actually process and consider what's best within something, right? So I was kind of like, I've been looking at these points, and obviously if you watch the podcast that we do, the Self-Perfected podcast, we've been going into these areas and talking about them more and more. But the reason I called this video Capitalism versus Communism, the Great Debate, is because in the context of communism versus capitalism, there will never be an end to that debate. It's like there's this paper I read last year from Oxford. Well, one of the universities involved was Oxford, and it was called "Ending the Reading Wars." Right, and it's basically discussing the debate in the scientific and educational circles around teaching children to read, around whether we should use phonics or whether we should use whole language theory. And both of them, if you look at the theory of them, have things that make sense within them, not the actual application, but the theory of them makes sense. And when you look at what we're doing with TechnoTutor, it's actually the integration of what's best from both and the application of that into the method that's actually best for a child. That's why our children are so advanced compared to any other child you've ever seen. And they're not dysfunctional, because you may see children who are advanced in a way seemingly, but they're really dysfunctional generally. Like they have one specific sort of advance. It's like a person who, you drop the matchbooks on the ground and they can count 1,000, 374 of them like that, but they can't wipe their own butt. That's not, plus what's the usefulness of that skill? People like look at that and they think like, well, that's amazing. That's irrelevant. That's not real. Meaning it's not a real useful skill. It's just like this overdeveloped point, but then everything else in the person's life is a mess. With our kids, they're very emotionally stable. They cooperate. They listen to us. They challenge us too, meaning they don't just do what we say. That we're not creating docile children who just listen to the authority. And I've talked about this in other places. And obviously the reason why we wouldn't want to create them where they just listen to authority is because look at what the authority is telling people to do right now. Do you want a child who just listens to authority? Meaning someone who has power over them from their perspective? Or do you want them to understand when anyone speaks, whether an authority or not, whether what that person's saying makes sense, and to understand how to look and integrate that information and do what's best based on it? So we're teaching our children in every possible way how to be self-responsible rather than just following orders, right? So there's always a balance to everything, right? We wouldn't give our child the choice of, if they're playing in the street and a car is coming, to choose whether to listen to us in that context, because we're responsible for their safety. And we know at their stage of development, let's say when they're 1 or 2 or something, they don't understand that they have to be aware of the car, and they're not just physically aware of it yet because they haven't had enough experience with it. So you have to use common sense. Always use common sense. And this that the challenge, even when I make a video like this, even when we do the podcast, the challenge I always have is anytime I say anything, it's so easy for someone to take it out of context. And I don't mean in the sense of like they're going to use it against me or something like that. I mean in the sense of their mind will automatically place what I'm saying into a box because they don't have all the context that I have that is behind what I'm saying. It takes time to develop that context, because you have to yourself go through and look at the contents of what you've accepted, what you've allowed that's not best, and dismantle all of that. There's a process for that. That's the DIP process, the Destiny I process. That's why we promote that, because we can't sit and explain everything to each individual. Even if I make a video and I explain everything I know, the person's still going to take things into their own perspective, in their own context. That doesn't mean I want people to just listen to what I'm saying and accept it. You know what I mean? Without questioning. It's just that you might think you're questioning something when actually you're just applying your personal bias. But where does that bias come from? That bias comes from your pre-programming, things you've already accepted, which you haven't questioned, right? And our world is pre-programmed. Oftentimes people who think that they are critical thinkers, or they think outside the box, or they question things, are really just, they're I don't want to say they're more of a follower than anyone else, but they're just as much as anyone else. They just have some special areas where they feel like they've questioned things, but all of that stuff really came naturally to them in most cases. Like an event happened and made them question something. They didn't really of their own accord start questioning, generally speaking, right? And I fall into that category too. Events occurred where I started questioning, but then even when I got information through that questioning, it wasn't the same as when I started really applying myself and going beyond the limits of my pre-programming. That was when I really started questioning things, because it wasn't, well, it's not so much about questioning things out there. That's easy to do. It's about questioning things in here. And many people don't even question out there either, right? But that's just like the beginning. You then have to start questioning in here. So what does this have to do with the title of the video, Capitalism versus Communism? Here's something to consider, okay? Because I'm not going to be able to convince somebody who is already convinced in the way they're in like they're not even interested in looking at something else. If that's the case, you're not gonna listen, right? But if you're open and you're willing to consider, then just hear out what I'm saying. What we're seeing in the world right now, the problems that you're seeing, is not the result of communism. It's not the result of capitalism. It's the result of the sum total of all human beings on earth not directing themselves individually within common sense and always considering what's best for all. Now, communism as a system can exacerbate that. So can capitalism. And it's interesting to me because many times people will say something is communist when it's actually the result of capitalism, and vice versa. Again, that doesn't mean I'm defending communism. It doesn't mean I'm defending capitalism. It's about, okay, let's look at what's best from both. And I'll get into that in a moment, but let's look at what's actually best from both. And let's integrate what is best. And if you say immediately, there's nothing good about communism. Well, I mean, how do you know that? Have you actually investigated it? Because the likelihood is, like, you've just seen images, and then those images you have now associated with that word, and you're like, I can't even look at this word or consider what it means or anything because of these images, this feeling, this outcome, right? And again, just before you start reacting and saying, well, this is just, you're promoting communism, I'm going to talk about that. I'm going to talk about capitalism too. But the point is, I'm not promoting either one. It's not about either one, because either one, whatever you say capitalism is, whatever you say communism is, that is even though it can be defined, it's different for many people. And many people are only defining, and I mean, think about it, just as much as you hate communism, there's somebody over here on the other side that feels exactly like you do, thinks exactly like you're thinking, but just towards the word capitalism. So if you don't allow yourself to actually transcend the point and look at what's best, and not accept communism as a system, not accept capitalism as a system, look at what can we create based on what's already here, and that would be best, and that would support everybody to have, let me put it this way. If I say everyone should have a right to a dignified life, you might say, oh, that sounds like you're a communist. But what does it say in the United States Constitution? You have a right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. How is that not a dignified life? Right? Now, if you're assuming that if I say dignified life, that equals whatever the communist dictators are promoting, and that's just how they get power. I'm not interested in power. I'm not interested in personal power for myself. Right? That doesn't mean everything I say, therefore, is valid just because I'm saying that. But what I'm saying is, if your fear is that if someone says we can have a world that's best for everybody, therefore they just want to be a communist dictator, because communist dictators always say they want to create a world that's best, or they don't even actually say that. They say they want to help the worker, or they say a lot of different things. But in your mind, when you hear let's create a world that's best, you think, oh, that's what a communist dictator says to get into power. Well, let's just take it back for a second. What if I said, look, I think that the best way to create a world that's best for everybody is a purely capitalist system where each person has the right to maximum freedom, maximum pursuit of happiness, maximum ability to build a business, to create value for society, to be rewarded for that. And I think that's the best way to create a world that's best for everybody. If you're a capitalist, I would imagine, I would assume you would have no qualms with me saying that. So if I say we can do that through capitalism, it's okay. But if I say let's create a world that's best for all, and I don't qualify it by saying anything about capitalism, your mind will immediately go to, oh, that's what a communist dictator says. So understand, first of all, I'm not promoting we should just have everybody do what the government says and everyone's dependent upon the government and all this stuff. Let me ask you a question, okay? Think about this for a second. Let's say the government said, we're going to give everybody enough money to have all of their basic needs met. Okay. Now, where are we going to get this money from? We're just going to print it out of thin air. Okay. We're just going to print it just like we do whenever we create the stimulus money, just like we do whenever we bail out the banks. Just anytime we do, we're just going to print it out of thin air, and we're not going to tax anybody on it. We're just going to create the money for this. But this money, we're going to give to people and they can spend it on whatever they want. Okay. But it'll be enough to cover everyone's basic expenses, not more, not less. Now, what's your fear about that? Your fear is there's going to be people who they don't work, they're lazy, and they're not going to do anything. Okay. They're just going to live off the system. Okay. Here's my question. If you didn't have to pay the tax on it, let's just say you were able to do it in a way where you have to pay any taxes on it. They're not taking from you. Like, in other words, when the banks create money, like when they create a loan, are they taking money from you? They're not. They're just creating it out of nothing. You understand that's how it works, right? That's how banks create money. Okay. They're not taking it from somebody. Now, when governments tax people, they are. So I'm not saying this, they're not the same thing. Okay. That's money that already exists. That's labor that already people are doing, and they're taking that from somebody else. So taxing wouldn't be the way to do it, because redistributing wealth is not going to ever be the way to do it, because the assumption you have to think like that is that there's only a limited amount. Like, if this person doesn't do something, then I can't take it to give to this person. Okay. But think about this. If you're saying the only way for everybody for us to have enough, let's say, is if we ensure that nobody has their basic needs met. Like, we literally don't ever even try to solve that problem. We just make sure the only way you can meet your basic needs is if you, let's say, get a good education that allows you a job in the system, or you become an entrepreneur. Okay. Well, that may sound like a good idea, because in your mind, you're thinking everybody has the same right to an education. Everybody can just go get an education. It's easy. But here's the problem. And this point right here, more than any other point, is so critical for you to consider, because it is the difference between seeing the capitalist system that you love destroyed or actually evolve so that it goes into what it could actually be, where people have more freedom. And this point is, in the first 7 years of your life, if you do not effectively integrate all the basic vocabulary required to be effective in whatever system we have, you will never, ever be able to compete equally. And so the people who would argue that, hey, we have competition in our system, that's what makes capitalism work. Just get rid of the government regulation, don't let the government interfere, which I agree. And everyone will just compete. And then through competition, you work hard, all this stuff. The thing is, I've seen janitors work hard their entire life. And what do they have at the end of it? Now, if someone did that in 1940, they maybe could have put their kid through private school, and like several kids, you know what I'm saying? Meaning the money system was in such a way back then that you could have a basic job, like working at a factory, putting screws on cars at a Henry Ford factory, for example, and put 6 kids through private school and have your own home and all this stuff. And the mom stayed at home. But that's not reality anymore. Because unfortunately, the way it works with money is the money will always accumulate into the hands of the ones who have that slight competitive advantage. It doesn't take much of an advantage to really get the big major advantage over everybody. And so all the money accumulates. But what's fascinating about it, this is just going to require self-honesty on your part, is it's like people will, and I have to keep saying this, I'm not saying capitalism bad, communism good. I'm not saying communism good or communism bad, capitalism good. Just hear what I'm saying. Imagine the person who says capitalism is the only way to do it. Competition, right? You work hard, you compete, you make money, and then that's how you add value, and that's how you accumulate wealth and all that stuff. And you deserve that because you did that. But and it's like I can see patterns, okay? I see that exact person, that exact personality type, that exact programming saying that. Go over here at the same person and say Bill Gates is evil, Dr. Fauci is evil, George Soros is evil. All these people are just trying to control everybody and push their communist agenda on everybody. Guys, these people are way fucking better capitalists than you'll ever be, than you even fucking dream about in your wettest of wet dreams. They are way better capitalists than you can ever conceive of ever being. Number one, they're smarter than you. They have a higher vocabulary than you, and they work a lot fucking harder than you. So all the things that you think is the keys to success in this system, chances are you're not doing them. And don't take this the wrong way. I'm not attacking you. I'm not blaming you. I'm not saying I don't believe you work hard and all this. But there's a point that you're not understanding, which is, I mean, think about it. Someone like Bill Gates, if you promote capitalism, do you think that helps him or hurts him? Do you think that gives him more or less power? And think about it. You could say, oh, well, he's just trying to, like, you know, regulate everybody and all this stuff. The government tried to do an antitrust lawsuit against Microsoft, and he fought that. So he's actually on your side from that perspective. Do you see what I mean? Everything you're arguing for, less government regulation, all these things, is what allowed him to accumulate so much fucking power that he has more say in your life than you'll ever have. Because he's a master capitalist. He competed his way to the very top. But here's the thing. He didn't actually compete. He has a pre-programming and a vocabulary that allows him to understand things and do things you and the average person will never be able to do in a million years without changing your pre-programming, which you don't know how to do. If you did, you wouldn't be arguing with anything I would say. And I think this is also the root of it, which is, well, I don't think it is. This is the root of it. People don't know that you can change. So what they do is they look at their life, they see if they're okay with it generally, and then they look at the system and they go, therefore, the system must be fine because I'm okay with where I'm at. And people who will argue for we should have capitalism and the billionaires, you know, how dare you try to take what they have? You're not even a billionaire. You're not even an entrepreneur. You don't even have your own business in most cases. Now, that doesn't mean I'm arguing we should take what they have. I'm an entrepreneur. I'm a capitalist. I understand the point of we don't want to just take from those who have and give to everybody else. The problem is, if you don't consider those who don't have, and you're like resistant to any solution to that, even that doesn't require taking what you have, just because you fear that it means even though it won't, it could at some point, or you're not even thinking it through, you're just reacting to it. You're literally a mind. It's funny because you're actually the product of communist brainwashing. You went to school, you saw all the movies, you see all the information, you've been brainwashed. That doesn't mean capitalism is bad. That doesn't mean communism is good. But you're not considering actual solutions. When you look at the French Revolution, for example, people like to talk about the French Revolution or the American Revolution. Revolutions never, ever last. It's like, how can you be upset that there's a revolution happening right now trying to overturn the US when that's like, you're literally the British back in 1775, 6, whatever. You're like, these idiots trying to overturn the system, and that's how they felt. Now, that doesn't mean I'm on the side of those who are doing the revolution. And that doesn't mean I think that everything about the American Revolution or the French Revolution was bad. But it's the revolutionary ideal itself that is fundamentally flawed, because it doesn't address the most fundamental point, which is the individual taking self-responsibility. Unfortunately, there's no system in itself that is going to force that to happen. And I say unfortunately, just meaning even if you're the pro-capitalism and so forth, right? You're looking at the result of not directing that point. Because human nature being what it is, the best capitalists are Mark Zuckerberg, Jeff Bezos, Bill Gates, George Soros. These amazing capitalists are always going to, not all of them, but most of them, as you can see, are going to get together and try to find a way to not let anybody else get into their little club. That has always been the story, no matter what. Human nature has not changed. So what are we going to do? What are we supposed to do? You say, well, just let it go. Don't regulate anything. Don't do anything. How do you enforce the government not enforcing anything? How do you make the government do what you want, with also saying that if you give the government any power whatsoever, it's always going to turn into some kind of tyranny? In other words, if you have an idea of what will be best and you want what, how do you enforce that? You say, just don't have any government. How are you going to prevent the people who are more effective than you at accumulating power and wealth, which if you're not at the status of Bill Gates, then you're the person who's not very effective, at least at this stage, because otherwise you'd be there doing that and you'd be having some say. How are you going to prevent those people from accumulating power and essentially creating their own government? Because even if we didn't have a government, then it's just the corporations and all of their rules and regulations that they set, their terms and conditions, that's going to control everything. So what do you do? What are you supposed to do? You understand that it's untenable. It's like to sit here and say, well, we can't have communism, and we can't even talk about what's best for everybody because that's tyrannical dictatorship. It's like, well, so what is your solution? Right. And I had this guy on here. I'm not going to name names or anything like that. I'm just looking at this comment. He said, we should teach the classics. Shakespeare fashioned every kind of person in every kind of situation you can imagine. Bible is full of morality takes. Milton Chaucer too. A great book's education will arm students. That's pretty cool, except people can't read. Except you already have a situation where most people go to school where they don't teach you to read effectively. They already teach the classics in public education. They already teach them in private schools, and those kids can't read. And I used to tutor all those kids in the private schools. They can't read because your ability, and you might think, oh, people can read. What are you talking about? Reading is, it's like what you see as being able to read is like, it's like an Olympic swimmer looking at somebody who is just doing some laps in the pool for fun. To them, they're like, yeah, that guy can't swim. You see what I'm saying? When I say read, when I say you can't read, I mean, you're not an Olympic swimmer at reading. You're just like the guy doing laps for fun. You can't read. Because if you could read, you'd be Bill Gates. He can read. He can process information. He can direct reality. He can read patterns in society and then influence them. He didn't just read Shakespeare, although he can read that too. He didn't just read Chaucer or Milton or whatever. He can read those, but he reads in a much more expanded way. He has all these words integrated into him. It's pre-programmed. I'm not saying he's special. He's got lucky. The being who is in Bill Gates's body got lucky to be in that position. That person's never going to change anything because it's too much control and power that they have. For them to try to support anybody else, it's like they have to lose some control. And then they look at everybody else and they go, everyone's retarded. That's how they look at it. I mean, that's how I look at it. Everyone's retarded. They can't process information. Like I look at my children, I look at how smart they are, and I look at how their ability to read. And it's like, damn, most high school kids can't even read at the level they can. And my son's 4. Because if they could, then every high schooler would easily pick up a calculus book and read it and then understand it and easily be able to do calculus. How many high school students can do calculus? How many people think calculus is hard? It's not. It's just information. It's not that complex. It's actually very simple. It's only doesn't seem that way when you have an emotional response because your foundation for understanding the information in there is weak because you didn't get everything integrated from the very beginning. And where does that beginning start? It starts when you're 3 years old. It starts when you're 2 years old. It starts when you're in the womb. That's where the foundation starts. And if that wasn't directed properly, that's why your current life is just a slave to the system. It's funny because people who are like pro-capitalism are just slaves to capitalism. I mean that literally, because do you have a job or are you an entrepreneur? If you're not an entrepreneur, you're just a slave to the system. And even the entrepreneurs are subject to the system. So I'm not saying they're like outside of it, but they're actually the ones having an actual influence in the system. If you're just having a job for your whole life, or your job, let's say, you're a consultant, right? People say consultants, right? It's just a job. You're dependent upon somebody else creating a company so you can go in there and tell them what to do. But really, they just need someone to tell them, stop being fucking stupid and stop letting your emotions get in the way of what you're doing. That's all consultants do. They just tell people, look, fire your fucking sister because she's a retard and she's not helping this business. And then suddenly they make more money. It's like, well, yeah, no shit. You stop paying this retard who wasn't adding any value whatsoever. But what I'm saying is most people who are even the pro-capitalist side are not actually capitalists. They're just benefiting from the system. They're not actually equal to the system doing it. They're just slaves to it. Because if people didn't build businesses, you wouldn't be able to. You would have nothing. You're subject to the fact of other people doing it. But what I'm saying is it's becoming untenable. Why? If you don't hear anything else of what I said, consider this. This pandemic that we're seeing, and it's really not the pandemic, it's the lockdowns, it's the shutdowns, it's the restrictions, it's the regulations. You don't have an answer to that because the capitalists are using it to gobble up everything. That doesn't mean I'm anti-capitalist because if we had a communist society, that wouldn't help either. But the reality is that's where things are going. So it's like you can sit here and say, well, we're proposing a system that would be best for all. Which just because you don't understand it doesn't mean it's not possible. But if you reject it outright, you have to understand we're moving towards a dystopian communist dictatorship, surveillance state, everything restricted, medical tyranny, all those things. It's happening right now. You're watching it happen. You don't have a solution. And it's like if you think just by reacting to someone who has a solution, that like if I just say, well, that's communist gobbledygook, that's just communism. How is that going to change anything? What's happening? Do you have a business? Are you an entrepreneur? Are you making $1 billion a year? Are you even on the path to doing that? Are you even trying to do that? Because if you're not, then you're not a capitalist. You're just a slave. You don't get a say. And it's funny because your fear that if you live in a communist dictatorship, you won't have any freedom. You don't have any freedom right now. What freedom do you have? If the governor in your city says, in your state says, you have to wear a mask, I mean, you can say, well, I won't wear it. I mean, I don't wear the mask. I don't fucking do it. But I'm not pretending like I'm free. See the difference? I'm not pretending like if everyone else is enslaved, I can be free. Because even if I don't have to follow the restrictions, for some reason I'm able to get around it. If everyone else is enslaved, what kind of fucking environment and world is that for me to live in? I don't want to live in a world where everyone feels like they have to wear a mask. I don't want to live in a world where everyone's afraid of each other. I don't want to live in a world where there's people who don't have enough. That doesn't mean I believe we should take from everybody and give to those people. And within yourself, you're like, well, they're not even doing anything. They don't deserve it. Well, that's how Bill Gates looks at you because he's got billions of dollars. So from his perspective, you don't deserve anything because what are you doing? What have you done with your life? Have you gotten a computer in every single person's home? Have you ever done anything like that? And then we talk about charity. It's like, well, if everyone just gives a helping hand, like allow people to be charitable, give a helping hand. Just let them do that. But don't try to create a system that would give everybody what they need. Well, unfortunately, under that way of thinking about it, you're actually arguing for charities. Do you understand Bill Gates doesn't work for Microsoft anymore? He gave all his money to charity. So how is he controlling so many things? How is George Soros controlling so many things? Because they have foundations. They're giving all their money to charity. They're better at charitable giving than you or any person in a church. They're better at it, but they're using it to control you. And so what I'm saying is if we create a system where you just don't have poverty anymore, no one can abuse that, can they? No one can abuse giving, and no one can abuse the point of you don't have enough, so I can manipulate you out of fear of not surviving. It's like people work at these stores and they have to wear these masks because otherwise they won't have a job. That's capitalism. How is that not? Like, so you should get to tell Academy Sports and Outdoors or Walmart or whatever that they can't make their employees wear masks? I mean, that's their right. They're a business. They can do whatever they want, right? You can go shop somewhere else. And if somebody else wants to open up a shop but they can't. They can't do it because now all those companies bought everything up. And everybody else thinks, hey, I'm not going to go to that shop because they don't make people wear masks. I'm afraid. How many people are actually looking through and thinking outside the box and able to see, like, I can stand up? The problem is the education levels in this world are so low. No one's able to see through anything. They're only reacting in fear. Or fear is in various forms. Fear of social shame. If I don't wear the mask, I'm afraid people will say or whatever. It's like I went to a store today and I walked in. I didn't even have a mask. And the guy said, hey, they have like a guy set up with a hand sanitizer and masks. And he's like, do you have a mask? And I was like, I said, what'd you say? No, I said, what's up? He goes, do you have a mask? I said, am I not going to be allowed to shop here if I don't wear a mask? And he goes, oh, I mean, I have mask here if you don't have one. I said, no, I'm asking you. Will I not be allowed to will I not be allowed to shop here if I don't wear a mask? And he like looks kind of at the sign and he's like, well, I mean, they're required, but I mean, it's not like we're gonna not let you shop, but they are required. And I said, okay, cool, thanks. And I just kept walking, and no one said anything else. Now, there's other places you can go where they'll follow you around and they'll have a policeman come up or a security guard or whatever. This place happened not to be the case. But that person doesn't have a choice, because if they're not willing to stand there and do that, they don't get a job. That's capitalism. And now you might say, well, but that person can just leave and they can go start a business. If they had the ability to do that, why the fuck are they doing a job in the first place? They don't have the ability to do it. And that doesn't mean, it's not because I think who they are is not valuable. And that's what's funny about it is, as a capitalist on that side of things, you might say everyone has the ability to rise up and work hard and achieve something. So you do agree that there is something fundamentally equal within everybody. Because otherwise, but then at the same time, you'll say, we can't have a system based on equality because not everybody's equal. Well, if not everybody's equal, then how can everybody equally have the same equal ability to compete in the system? So what you're saying is, imagine you're born into a family where your mother's a crackhead and your dad fucking left and he's like abusive or whatever, and you got molested by your uncle constantly, like repeatedly every week, and then you're so emotionally fucked up, and then you're on drugs and everything, and someone says, look, man, you just gotta, like, just work hard. And like within yourself, even the thought of waking up in the morning causes you anxiety. And then here you are, someone who just got lucky. Your parents, were pretty stable. They had good jobs. They put you to a generally decent school. You got the diploma that you needed. You got the degree that you needed just because you followed the system. You didn't actually learn anything. In some cases, you may have had to really learn something because you went into engineering or something like that. But because you had the right foundation, you were able to specialize in that field. You can't do anything else. You can only do that. I mean, it's not like you could run a fucking business like I do, where you have to manage a supply chain, accounting, legal, distribution, sales, all that. You wouldn't be able to do all of those things. You can only do this one thing that you specialized in. It took your whole fucking life to learn one thing just so you can go get a job where the thing that you can't do, that person actually created a company and had to deal with lots of different things. You could never have done that because you could only do one thing. And ultimately that thing will most likely be automated, or it'll be automated enough things will be automated, they just won't need a lot of those people, so there'll only be a few of those spots. But then you're going to tell this person over here, who's in a totally different place than you in terms of foundation, environment, everything, genetics even, that they have the same equal opportunity as you to just rise up in the system. Like, imagine how this person would feel about the world. And then unfortunately, here comes somebody who's a capitalist, and a really good capitalist, way better than you, and says, the reason why you're in that position is because of these people over here, like this guy who's an engineer. He's got a better opportunity than you. He's middle class. He's got money. We need to take his money and give it to you. We need to tax the rich. Do you think that the guy over here saying that is ever going to allow himself to really be taxed, or is he going to find some way around it? Like, let's be honest. The people who are promoting communism, as you call it, are the best capitalists. It is a competitive tactic. It's just like feminism. It's just like LGBT. It's just like Black Lives Matter. All this bullshit is just people trying to get a competitive advantage for the minority. The minority being the few elite in this world, who is not those literally same people, but it's that same group, in essence, that's always run the world. And now they're just trying to get rid of the one last thing, which is the United States of America, the last place on earth where you can actually go from here to there. There's not an actual clear direct pathway. It's just a possibility. It's not even going to be a possibility if we allow all of that to fall. But unless you're able to change your pre-programming from where you're at, your physical programming, your resonance, unless you're able to change that, you're not going to go up here. And that's why it's like, I'm not blaming the person who spent their whole life as an engineer, let's say, and that's all they have. and they had a middle class life and they have a pension and all this stuff, or a 401k or whatever. I'm not blaming them. That was their pre-programming. They can't change it. They can't suddenly become an entrepreneur. The people who become entrepreneurs, it was within them already. You don't understand how, but it was. So this idea that you have, so I'm not saying you can't change what's in here, but you can't if you don't know what you're doing, and no one knows what they're doing. Well, not no one, but very few. Very few know. So the ones that look like the examples of success, they didn't have to change anything. It actually, in a way, came naturally. There's a video I suggest that you watch. You can look it up on YouTube. It's called Advantages of a Pre-Programmed Design by Bernard Pullman. And he explains very clearly. It's a really good video to listen to, where he explains this point. Now, let's look at the communism side. What is it that we're all afraid of? Where we're going to be controlled. We're going to be forced to do stuff. You're not going to have any opportunity for creativity. That is already happening, first of all. So we need to just get over the fear because it's already happening. Now, how do we stop it? How do we prevent it? How do we take that and then turn it into something that's best? We have to educate people. Because the only justification that a government has for controlling everybody is that everyone is afraid of each other. Like, if you weren't actually afraid of anybody, why would the government even, like, if you weren't and no one else was, and everyone knew, everybody is effectively educated, everyone makes decisions that are best, generally speaking. I mean, there may be some flukes and people who do stupid shit and whatever, but I'm saying, generally speaking, the average person is so well educated, not just like they're an engineer, but they can process information. They can take anything like that's said on the news and be like, that doesn't make sense. I already read the paper. Imagine what the news would have to do. Like, the news couldn't manipulate people. The news, the mainstream news, knows that people are dumb. So all they do is just put a bunch of fancy images and associations, and then they manipulate people, and they hide the things that they don't want them to see. And the social media companies all conspire together to make sure people, it's like, you might see it, but you already agree with it. That's why you're seeing it. People who don't agree with it will never see it. So what are you going to do now in that situation? You're just going to sit there and rail against communism? How is that going to change anything? How are you any different than the fucking hippie protester out in the street, the Antifa, just protesting and saying they don't like something? How are you any fucking different? You don't have any solution. We have a solution. And the solution is not control everybody. It's not force anyone to do anything. It's taking self-responsibility. It's about standing within what is left of the capitalist opportunity right now, taking that and using that to support everybody who's able to be supported, by them making the choice, by saying, you know what, I believe in what you're saying. I see I can do that. I'm going to buy that. And what is it they're buying? It's the solution to them changing their programming, re-educating themselves to a level that for the average person was never possible before. That's what we have. That's TechnoTutor. And what is the vocabulary that they need? That's Destiny I process. It's simply understanding how your programming works. And for many people, unfortunately, that what I'm saying will be so far over their heads and so outside the pre-programming, they're just going to fight it and say all kinds of negative, nasty things about it. What they don't realize is they're literally the communists. They're literally the ones who are preventing anything from changing, so that the fascist dictators that are coming or that are here or whatever can use that as the reason why they need to control everybody. Like, you are contributing to it because you're not actually standing up and saying, look at me, I'm actually fundamentally changing. I'm able to do more than I was pre-programmed to do. So you can too. And let me show you how. And then you build a business out of that. And then guess what? As you accumulate, you then now have power and say in the world. You can say, hey, that law shouldn't be passed. That's not a law that actually supports everybody. You would actually have influence in government. You could say, hey, here's what government should be allowed to do. Here's what it shouldn't be allowed to do. But as it stands, guess who actually has that say? The capitalists, the ones you're defending. I'm not saying get rid of capitalism, but I'm saying you're not participating in it. You're actually a communist. You're actually totally dependent on the system. You just don't like the system called government because you don't see the other system. The government is not just the government that you see. The government is that which controls your mind. It is the entire system. It is media. It is education. It is politics. It is the economic system, the monetary system. It is the banks. It is the social media. It is the mainstream media. It is entertainment. It is every single thing that has any influence whatsoever that is able to get into a person's mind and in some way insert some information at any stage of life. And it all is coordinated through the capitalist system, through money. It's really not the capitalist system, it's money, the control of money, and allows that system to maintain itself and never have anyone challenge it. And then here you are saying, we have to maintain that system because otherwise we'd have communism. I'm like, guy, you already live in a communist dictatorship. You just believe that you have freedom. But if 2020 has taught you anything, it should teach you. You don't. Otherwise, what the fuck are you complaining about? If you're actually free no matter what and nothing is bothering you, then why do you care what anybody else is saying, even if they are a fucking communist and they're promoting that? What does it matter to you? It's not going to change what you do. You're totally free. Nothing affects you. You're delusional. The system you live in has enslaved you, has you by the balls. You have no say. What are you going to do about it is the question. Because my suggestion is become equal to the system, become the best fucking capitalist that has ever existed. Do the thing that most successful, good capitalists don't do, which is band together, promote a system that's best for all. It's not about enforcing it, it's not about forcing. It's about let's start by educating everybody effectively. You don't know how to do that? You need to look at Technotutor. That's the solution. I'm not going to explain it all here. Okay, if you're serious, you'll find a way to get in touch and find out. It's simple as asking a question. But it is the solution. It's the thing that makes everything click. Because without it, we're all fucked. Without a solution that allows the individual to empower themselves to take self-responsibility, we're all fucked. Because you can sit there and promote capitalism and stuff all day long. The problem is you're not considering how do we support those who don't have a competitive advantage and are fucked. That's the majority of people. Do you understand? Just what's the most famous, well-known principle in capitalism? 80-20. I think it's called the Pareto principle. 80-20. So 80% of the world is not going to succeed in the current system. What are you going to do about that? Because that's the people who's going to come after you if and when you become successful. And they're the ones that are already coming after you, even though you're not successful. And they're doing it based on the 1% of the 1%. Because they're trying to get rid of everybody else. They don't want anybody else in control. They don't want anything that can ever affect their ability to influence and control ever again. That's what this is all about. The pandemic, the lockdowns, the cyber pandemic that's apparently happening or coming or whatever, the elections, all the stuff that you're seeing that you complain about, that you think is Antifa, communist takeover, it's all coming. It's all happening to make sure that no one ever stands up and challenges anything ever again. So what are you going to do about it? A revolution is not going to change anything. It has to be an evolution of human nature starting within the individual. When we have enough people who really care and who have enough influence, we can change systems so that, for example, like I know you're just so anti-communism, you could never agree with this. But why not have that when a mother gets pregnant and has a child, whether she has a husband or not, she has enough and she never has to stress or worry. Now, wouldn't it be best if she is married and so the husband takes responsibility for that and provides for the child? Absolutely. But what are you going to do with the billions of the people in the world already right now where that's not the case? And do you think that if nobody had any stress of survival, that would mean your life would be better or worse if nobody had any stress of survival? Because if you think that your life would be worse if nobody had any stress of survival, what you're saying is the only way for you to live is for everybody to be in constant stress and fear of survival. That means you're brainwashed. That means you're an abuser. That means you're justifying the abuse of billions of people daily. You're the person that they're coming for, these communists. because they're saying you don't care about anybody. That's why you don't want to wear the mask. You don't care about others. You don't care about others. I'm not saying you should wear a mask. That doesn't fucking do anything. But you should start caring. If you care about yourself, you should start caring and start figuring out, okay, I really need to sit down and reevaluate everything I think I know and believe because it's all been put into me by this very system. It's like everything you know is a sum product of the system. The system that we have now is the same system we had when you were born in your whole life. It hasn't changed. You're just now seeing it more. Maybe you've seen it from the very beginning, but it still influenced you. You don't have a solution. We have a solution. We are not going to impose it on anybody. We can't. It's not even in our consideration of imposing anything on anybody. Just because other people lie and say that they're going to they're doing what's good for the people, we're not saying that. We're not going to do what's good for the people. We're saying everybody needs to stand up and take self responsibility. If you're not willing to do it, you have no right to complain about what happens in this world. So those who are capitalist versus communist realize you don't even know what the fuck these words mean. The words themselves are like trigger points. That's all they are. What is actually best for everybody? Would you agree that it's best for everybody to have an effective education? And if you say no because you'd have to force blah blah blah, I didn't ask you that. If there was a way everybody could have an effective education where you don't have to force anybody to do anything, would you like that? Would you agree with that? If you were born in the shoes of a child who was born into an extreme abusive environment, no matter how abusive you think your environment is, multiply it by 1,000. Would you want that for yourself? Would you want that for your children? Because that's what's coming for everybody, unless we stand up and we do something. And that something is to be equal to the capitalist system, to become the new tech entrepreneurs that care about life. That's what we're doing. That's what Technotutor is about. So enough with the bullshit about communism. If I say something's best, we want to create a system that's best for all. Because whether you're a communist or a capitalist, don't you want a world that's best for all? Or are you really saying, no, no, I want capitalism because I want a world that's not best for all? Or is it that you just think that's the way to do it? I agree. There's elements that we need to maintain: freedom, liberty, the ability to not be forced to do things, the ability to grow into unlimited potential, not to have to stand in fucking line for bread. I mean, it's like basic shit. But some people do have to stand in line for bread because they have to spend all their whole life in a fucking job that they don't want to do, that they have no passion for whatsoever, just because they were born into a shitty environment. And you don't care about that, do you? You should care, because it's by not caring about that you're allowing the conditions that's going to destroy everything you do care about. You have to understand that. So it's not about capitalism versus communism. It's about human evolution, not evolution by competition where it's random fucking chance winning the lottery, which is how it works now, but by individual responsibility, supporting yourself, showing others that it's possible, looking for those who want to support themselves, showing them how, and then teaching them to do the same. That's what Jesus said. Are you even living the Jesus principles and claiming to be a Christian and claiming to believe in God? You're not even living the most basic principles? Or are you just using the book to justify why you feel morally superior while you sit on your fucking ass and benefit from a system that fucks most people over, and you literally are lazy and you're just pretending like you're not? You spend your whole life doing fuck all. Because when you die and you face yourself in that moment, are you going to be able to look in the mirror